"We're here to discuss your failing company," my father announced, his voice booming off the dark oak walls of the family dining room like a gavel striking the end of a trial. The Holloway house hadn't changed in decades. Same stone fireplace. Same dusty oil paintings of ancestors who looked just as arrogant as the man currently presiding at the head of the table. Dad looked at each of us with the detached expression of a man used to control, used to silence. Mom nodded quietly, folding her hands in her lap as if praying the coming explosion wouldn't stain the rug. My older brother Marcus shifted in his chair, jaw clenched, ready to argue before the discussion even started. The mood was heavy with judgment and something else, expectation. They still believed they held the power here. That's what made this so satisfying. That's when my sister Camila gasped. Her fake nails clicked against her phone screen as she shoved it toward Dad. "Why is your face on Forbes' 50 under 50 list?" she blurted, disbelief hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The room froze. Time seemed to splinter. Even the ancient grandfather clock in the corner gave up its ticking. For a moment, I let the silence hang. I wanted them to feel it, the shift, the confusion, the bitter taste of being outplayed. This was the moment I had dreamed about during those sleepless nights on a couch in Chicago, when I had nothing but a broken laptop, $300 to my name, and a rage that burned hotter than any furnace. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You didn't think I'd stay broken forever, did you?" Dad narrowed his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty crawling up his throat like acid. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. "You were out of the family business. You left." Correction, I was forced out. 2 years ago, after giving everything I had to Holloway Shipping Co., my father sold my shares behind my back, called it a strategic family decision, and told me I needed to learn humility. I had stood in the same room, screaming, sobbing, begging for an explanation. Marcus had told me I was being emotional. Camilla laughed. Mom cried but said nothing. And when I stormed out of that door with nothing but my suitcase and a heart full of fire, they thought I'd disappear. But I didn't. I moved to Chicago with a chip on my shoulder and a will like steel. I worked at a tech startup by day and bartended at night. I slept on a friend's floor and kept a journal of every name I planned to bury. In 6 months, I taught myself business development, learned how to pitch, and found an investor who believed in my madness. Her name was Clara, a former logistics mogul from Brazil, who had lost her own company in a divorce that left her with more scars than assets. She really saw me, and backed my first round with $35,000 of her own money. That was the beginning of Hollow. I poured every ounce of my anger, every insult and betrayal into that company. I built tech no one else dared touch. Neurolinked. Wearable devices that track emotional triggers and improve focus in high stakes. Environments, pilots, surgeons, traders, even military units. By the end of year 1, we were in contract negotiations with the U.S. Department of Defense. By year 2, Forbes had slapped my face on their list and called me the queen of neural grit. And now I was back. "I came to buy what's left of this crumbling dynasty," I said coolly, taking a sip from the bourbon glass I'd poured myself without asking. "And to make sure you all understand what happens when you treat blood like currency." Marcus stood, fists clenched. "You think just because you made a few dollars in tech that you can come here and—" I raised a hand, cutting him off. "I didn't make a few dollars, Marcus. I made $72 million in under 2 years. I own 7 patents. I control 3 logistics routes your company is desperate to lease. And guess what? I'm buying your debt too. Which means I don't just get to sit at the table, I get to flip it." Camilla looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "You can't just waltz in here and—" "Yes, I can," I snapped. My voice had steel in it now. "I can do whatever the hell I want, because none of you believed in me. You threw me away, and now I own you." Dad stood slowly, the veins in his neck pulsing. "You're still my daughter, and you will speak with respect in this house." "This house?" I laughed bitterly. "The one you mortgaged 3 months ago to cover the company's payroll? That's mine too now. Bought it last week. So if you want to stay, I suggest you start paying rent." His face turned red. Rage, shame, fear, it was hard to tell. But I'd waited for this, every second of it. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice, about proving that I was never the weak one. They were cowards hiding behind tradition and last names. I walked slowly around the table, heels echoing on the marble like the toll of a warning bell. I placed a printed document in front of each of them. Acquisition papers, terminations, replacements. You can all leave now, I said softly but firmly. The Holloway name doesn't mean power anymore. It means failure. I'm giving you the courtesy of walking away before I start firing people with the same ruthlessness you showed me. No one moved. So I turned and walked out, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders with each step. My name is Janice Holloway. And this time, I came to burn it all down. Charleston became my grave, the day my father sold my shares in Holloway Shipping without so much as a phone call. I remember standing on the white porch of the family estate, suitcase in hand. The humid South Carolina air thick with the scent of magnolias and deceit. It's better this way, he had said. No remorse. No explanation. Just betrayal carved into that granite face of his. Mom cried. Marcus gave a nod like I was a soldier going off to war except I hadn't enlisted. Camilla didn't even bother showing up. She had already taken my office. My father's empire, his version of it, didn't have room for daughters with opinions. Especially not one who dared to suggest digitizing operations or automating the archaic supply chain system. I wasn't just dismissed. I was erased. So I burned. Not literally, not yet. But inside me, something scorched and blackened. I didn't have a plan, just rage and $2,100 in my checking account. A busted Hyundai Elantra, and the kind of sleepless ambition only true betrayal can ferment. Charleston was behind me. Chicago would be my battlefield. I slept on a friend's couch in an apartment with no heating. In the winter, I wrapped myself in 3 coats and cried into silence while she snored 2 feet away. By day, I temped at a logistics software firm for minimum wage, quietly studying their systems. By night, I bartended at a dingy place near Wrigley Field, where men called me sweetheart and tipped in quarters. The fury inside me never faded. It sharpened. Every dollar I saved was a weapon. Every minute I studied finance code hardware was a blade I honed in secret. I became obsessed. An obsession is more powerful than talent when you have nothing left to lose. 6 months into that exile, fate or vengeance maybe both brought me to Clara Ray. She was sitting alone at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, her laptop open, face lit by spreadsheets and bitterness. I recognized the look. It's the one you get when you've been gutted by someone you once trusted. I'd heard rumors about Clara, how her ex-husband tricked her out of her controlling shares in a Brazilian freight empire, how she now invested in risky women with fire in their guts. I walked up, introduced myself, and pitched her an idea I didn't even have a name for yet. Just rage, wireframes, and vision. She listened, then she said one thing I never forgot. Build something they can't ignore. That afternoon, Clara wrote me a check for $35,000. It felt like blood money in the best way. I moved into a tiny studio apartment, bought second-hand hardware parts, hired 2 misfits who owed me favors, and started building NeuroHollow. NeuroHollow wasn't just a company, it was revenge in circuitry. We made emotion-regulating neural devices originally for anxiety sufferers, but the market pivoted fast. Pilots, surgeons, Wall Street traders, anyone who needed perfect focus and no emotional interference wanted in. We coded stability into chaos, brains into battlefields. Within a year, we were valued at $18 million. By year 2, I'd inked deals with the Department of Defense. Forbes slapped my face on their 50 under 50 inches cover and called me the next tech messiah. I hated that title, but I smiled for the camera anyway. Because every flashbulb was a blade I could later throw. Still, I said nothing publicly about Holloway Shipping, not one word. Instead, I made a list. Names, dates, every person who laughed when I failed. Every friend who ghosted me when I left Charleston. Every board member who voted me out. The lawyer who drafted the papers. The intern who leaked my resignation email. Camilla, Marcus, Dad. I even added my mother, not of a hatred, but because silence is a betrayal all its own. And next to each name, I wrote what they took from me and how I'd take it back. Revenge isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's surgical. I knew that when I returned to Charleston, I'd do it as a queen, not a beggar. That I'd take the Holloway legacy and reshape it in my image, then burn the rest down. So I planned. I started by secretly acquiring 11% of Holloway Shipping's outstanding debt through a shell company registered in Delaware. Then another 9%. Within 6 months, I had silent control of over 30% of their liabilities. I bled them quietly like a wolf draining a dying stag. Next, I targeted the firm's biggest client, a cross-border oil transport contract with a Houston firm. I offered them a better rate through a Neurohollow-backed partner. They dropped Holloway without warning. One stroke, one contract. The empire cracked. Then came the board. I approached Deborah Mays, one of the few Holloway board members who had once spoken kindly to me after the meeting where they sold me out. She was old school but bitter toward Dad for years of disrespect. With a sweet cocktail of guilt and financial incentive, I brought her to my side. One by one, I flipped them. By the time I walked back into that mansion on King Street in Chapter 1, it wasn't a surprise. It was an execution. And I wasn't done. Back in Chicago, I sat in my glass office, the lights of the city painting streaks across the windows. I watched the markets, tracked the fallout, and planned my next steps. The house was mine, the company would be renamed. And the final piece of revenge ruin was still to come. Camilla had no idea that I'd already hired a forensic accountant to audit her misuse of company funds. Marcus was being quietly blackballed by every firm in New York thanks to a carefully leaked HR report, and Dad, well, Dad was about to lose something even more precious than power.
His name.
When I walked back into the family mansion on King Street, I didn't come to play nice. I came with a lawyer, a document, and a sharpened blade of purpose. Elias Monroe, dressed in his signature charcoal suit, stood beside me like a silent executioner. He didn't talk much, didn't need to. His reputation came before him. This was the man who once dismantled a pharmaceutical conglomerate in a weekend, walked away with $10 million, and never smiled once during depositions. Dad looked up from his whiskey glass like he still held the throne. The audacity would have been admirable if it weren't so pathetic. "I see you've done ... he said. The sarcasm was thin like old paint on rotting wood. I didn't respond to the bait. I pulled a folder from my leather bag and slid it across the table. Inside were the documents that proved everything. The acquisition of Holloway's 2 largest investors, the controlling shares held in trust under my alias, and the full transfer of authority to my holding company. "Holloway Shipping now belongs to me," I said. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need to shout. I had already won. His eyes scanned the first page and then stopped. His hand twitched. I could see the calculation running through his mind who helped me, but it didn't matter. The truth was inked in legal language and binding signatures. "You," he choked, halfway between disbelief and rage. "That's right," I interrupted. "You're sitting in my boardroom now." Camilla gasped, hand covering her mouth like she might actually be sick. Marcus stood so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood. For a moment, I thought he might throw something. Instead, he clenched his fists and muttered, "You vindictive little bitch." I turned slowly toward him. "Careful, Marcus. That tone might cost you your severance. If you're lucky, I'll let you keep your car. Or maybe I won't." Mom said nothing, as usual, but her hands trembled in her lap. I saw the tears brimming in her eyes, and for a flicker of a second, I wondered if I should feel anything. Pity, maybe. Nostalgia, but no, that part of me was long buried. I was not the daughter they raised, I was the woman they created through betrayal. Dad finally spoke, each word slow and poisoned. "You think money gives you the right to walk in here and take everything I built?" "No," I replied, stepping forward. "Revenge does. The money just makes it easier." Elias placed a second folder on the table: termination letters, financial reviews, and a notification of board restructuring. All perfectly legal. All final. There would be no comeback story here. This was the last chapter for the Holloway name as they knew it. "You don't have to make this ugly," Mom whispered. "I didn't make it ugly," I said sharply. "You all did when you sold me out. You sat silent when they gutted my future like a deer, Mom. You watched them hand my life to Camilla like I was some extra character in her fairy tale. And now you want mercy? Camilla snapped. Oh, come off it, Janice. You think you're some righteous heroine? You're a tech brat with a vengeance complex. I smiled. And you're a fraud with a spending problem. Don't worry, your corporate card's been frozen. Your expense reports are under audit. You should probably call your lawyer. Or maybe your sugar daddy in Canada. Wasn't he paying for that fake wellness retreat in Vancouver? Camilla's mouth opened, then closed. Marcus looked like he might actually explode. I let the silence stretch. Then I delivered the final blow. I'm dissolving the Holloway name from the company. Effective next quarter, the business will relaunch as HelloFreight, a fully autonomous AI-integrated logistics firm. Charleston's hub will be restructured. New York's will be closed. And any member of this family who wants to stay involved will need to apply. You're erasing us, Dad growled. No, I corrected. I'm upgrading what you refuse to evolve. You had your chance to build a legacy. You chose ego instead. Elias handed them each a folder of non-negotiable terms. My family stared down at their own obituaries in corporate ink. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I turned to Elias. Initiate phase 2. He nodded and pulled out his phone. One by one, scheduled reports were released to the press. A leaked financial investigation into Marcus's mismanagement of New York contracts. An internal HR complaint naming Camilla in an abuse of power probe involving junior staff. Even a quiet revelation that my father had misrepresented earnings during a crucial acquisition 3 years ago. Nothing criminal but enough to soil the Holloway name in boardrooms and country clubs from Charleston to Boston. By the time they realized what hit them, it would be too late. This is war, Dad muttered. No, I said, stepping back toward the door. War would imply you still had a chance. This is a funeral. You just haven't accepted the burial yet. I walked out of that mansion without looking back. I didn't need to. I had burned the place once in my heart. This time I just made it public. The air outside was warm, humid with the perfume of late spring jasmine. Charleston's streets looked the same. But they weren't. Not anymore. Now they belonged to me. By the first frost of winter, Holloway shipping was no more. I watched from my glass office 30 stories above Charleston Harbor as the new signage was installed on the main headquarters. Thick, gleaming steel letters spelled out the future. HelloFreight. A new empire, born from the ashes of my family's neglect. I had kept the location, not out of sentiment, but as a monument to my vengeance. Every polished hallway and office I redesigned screamed power, efficiency, control. The old world was gone. This was my Carolina now. The merger with NeuroHollow's AI systems had turned the rusting skeleton of Holloway shipping into a machine that ran on data, automation, and precision. No more manual shipping schedules. No more outdated warehouse protocols. My proprietary predictive algorithm now moved freight from Savannah to Seattle faster and cleaner than any of my competitors. The boardroom, once filled with men twice my age and half my talent, now answered to me. But revenge isn't about destroying someone, not really. It's about leaving them behind. Take Marcus, for example. The man who once called me too emotional for leadership was now living in Florida on the edge of a gated community banned from serving on corporate boards after the financial scandals I let quietly slip into the public. I offered him $500,000 to disappear, not because I had to, but because it was satisfying to pay him off like a liability, like a regret.
He took the money and left Charleston 3 days later without a word. Camilla was trickier.
I gave her a position director of public relations not because she earned it but because she could be useful under a tight leash. I locked her in a glass office near mine, where she'd be close enough to monitor, but far enough to never mistake my generosity for forgiveness. I set her schedule. I approved her travel. I even chose her password for her corporate login, Exile2025. Subtle cruelty is the most refined form of revenge. And then there was Mom. I wired her enough money to pay off her mortgage. In pounds, not dollars. I wanted her to know that I had expanded beyond their small southern reach, that while they'd locked me in Charleston's traditionalism, I had gone global. She sent a thank you card, not a call, not a visit. Just a white envelope with 2 words written in her careful, slanted handwriting. I'm sorry. Too little. Too late. I never responded, and finally, my father. I didn't fire him. No, I gave him an office small windowless, buried on the third floor of the old operations wing. It had a desk, a chair, and a disconnected landline. His name was scrubbed from the executive site. No meetings, no authority. Just emptiness. He came in every day anyway. Wore a suit, carried a briefcase. Sat there from 9 to 5, as if pretending hard enough would turn the clock back. He never looked me in the eye again. I suppose he knew this was a more devastating sentence than any termination letter could offer. This was what he left me with. And now I'd handed it right back to him, stripped, rotting, and powerless. But even as the dust settled and the empire bowed before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unfinished was waiting just beyond the door. And I was right. It started with a knock. Elias entered, holding a manila folder thicker than usual. His face was neutral, but his eyes told me the contents would not please me. "This came in this morning," he said. I opened the file and scanned the first few pages. A lawsuit. Filed by a private third party, based in Canada. Alleging that NeuroHollow's core neural response algorithm was not entirely my own. My pulse spiked. I flipped to the documentation. Camilla Holloway had quietly sold access to some of NeuroHollow's development code 2 years ago before the merger, when she was still pretending to be uninvolved in anything real. She had sold it for $60,000 to a Canadian research group under a pseudonym, buried it in an offshore holding, and kept her hands clean. Until now, rage blurred the words in front of me. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. I had allowed her back into my company. I had given her a title, a seat, a second chance, not out of mercy, but to keep her close. And now she'd tried to steal from me again. "You want me to bury it?" Elias asked calmly. "No," I said. I stood, heels clicking sharply as I walked toward the executive lounge where she always took her tea break. At exactly 3:30 p.m., she was there, scrolling on her phone, looking like the spoiled heiress she always pretended not to be. "Camilla," I said, my voice cold enough to frost the walls. She looked up and smiled. "Janice, what a surprise." I threw the folder on the table. Her smile cracked. "What the hell is this?" she asked, eyes scanning the lawsuit. "You tell me," I said. "How long were you planning to keep feeding my tech to Canada? Or did you just need a new handbag?" Her expression shifted to fear, then to fury. "You think I owe you anything? You stole this company. You took everything." "I took back what was already mine," I said, leaning forward. "You're the one who's always taken. Always needed someone else to build the world for you. But you never earned a brick." Her lip trembled, but I saw the pride still clinging to her spine. She wouldn't beg, not Camilla. So I ended it for her. "You're done, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. All devices, files, and access will be seized. Try to run, and I will have you extradited before your passport even cools." She stood speechless, but I leaned in closer. "You should have stayed silent, Camilla. You should have remembered what I did to Dad, and known I'd do worse to you." And I did. Within 72 hours, I had filed countersuits, locked her out of every platform, and published a press statement naming her as a former employee under internal investigation for breach of trust. I didn't ruin her. I obliterated her. That was the final betrayal. The final flame. Now, as I sit in my glass office, the city bowing below me, I breathe easily. I built an empire. I buried a dynasty. I turned pain into profit, betrayal into strategy, and my own name into a weapon. They tried to erase me, but I became the ink. I didn't just survive. I conquered. And I am never ever giving it back.